Welcome to the Rich with Purpose podcast, the finance podcast that's about more than just money. I'm your host, Thabojan Rasiah, financial advisor to hundreds of successful clients over the years. In each episode of this show, I speak with other experts in the complex world of money and finance, and together we discuss how you can ensure you make smart decisions with your money. Even more importantly, how to connect those decisions with your values and your purpose in order to achieve everything that is most important to you. Please note that everything we discuss is not personal advice, but general in nature. For the full disclaimer, please visit our website, richwithpurpose.com.au, where you can also register your details to get access to all our free resources. And please hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. In today's episode, I speak to Jennifer Maher. Jennifer is a principal lawyer at KCL Law, where she practices as an accredited wills and estate specialist. What sets Jennifer apart, however, is that she not only writes wills and estate plans, but her estate litigation work provides her with practical experience where the rubber hits the road. In this episode, we explore the ideas of what estate planning really is, how to protect your legacy, and the problem with thinking a simple will is enough. We also discuss how you should think about estate planning, that you should think about the outcomes you want for your loved ones when you're not here anymore, and that you need to think about what can go wrong for those you care about when you pass away. You will learn about all the things in your life that are not covered by a will, such as joint assets, superannuation, companies, and trusts. And make sure you listen to the end, where we talk about when and how children should inherit money, and that it's not actually the money itself that's important, but a good understanding of your purpose and values that will allow you to create the right estate plan for you. So if you're interested in learning about how to protect your legacy, you will enjoy this episode of the Rich with Purpose podcast. Welcome to the Rich with Purpose podcast, Jennifer Maher.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Great to have you on, Jen. I know we've been talking about getting you on for a little while, so I'm really excited to be talking about the world of estate planning, wills, powers of attorney, all that sort of stuff, which, most people don't like really thinking and talking about. But I know that in all the work we do with our clients, it's actually one of the things that's most important to people, and yet people just don't deal with it properly. So, I know when we're helping clients, we really make it a point to make sure that we're making sure that people do what they need to do and have the right things in place so that when they're not around anymore, they're leaving their loved ones in a good position and not with a big mess. And I'm sure you've got plenty of stories on that. So before we get into talking about estate planning, I'm really interested in your background and how you got into the world of estate planning in the first place.
Well, it's not that exciting though. I'll say that first and foremost. It started, my passion for estate planning, helping clients forward plan, protect their legacies, protect their children, really started in a very small firm that I worked in Mount Eliza a long time ago. And my principal at the time was an accredited financial planner, and he was also a lawyer. And so many look at that and go, oh, what does that equate to? But very smart man, but also very passionate about this area. And so I guess his passion rubbed off on me. And then part of that grew to, working in a trustee company and getting the insight of really seeing how things can go bad and how people's interests need to be protected. And then that sort of grew into just specialising in wills and estates. And now that's all I do. So I do the estate planning, the estate administration, and then the litigation aspect too. So the war stories come from litigation, and they're enlightening for clients to try and say to them, some clients have ideas about particular things they want to achieve, and, they might not be practical, or they might create more of a mess at the end of the day when they're not around. So taking, clients through options and war stories, and just sometimes just saying to them, you can leave it if you want to leave it that way. It's okay. So people sometimes also have those preconceived ideas around well, I feel obligated, like I need to do this. And then sometimes it's fine for me to say to them, if you want to be philanthropic and leave some money to charity, that's okay. You don't have to follow the strict, rule of law that, everything has to go to family, even if you don't like them or if they haven't treated you well and things like that. And so it's a great area to work in because I get to meet different people, and it's a great area to work in because everyone is so different that what I deal with on a day-to-day basis is different. So
yeah, everyone's different, aren't they? Everyone's got their own thoughts and feelings and background, and we've spoken about it, family dynamics. We've spoken about in other episodes of, we've got our family upbringing's different, our cultures are different. We've grown up in different countries or the same country, but in different towns or cities, and that can change. And we've got our own biases and things that different ways that we look at the world, and we even have different values that different people have. So that would all influence it. So I guess before we get into helping our listeners understand what they should be doing when it comes to thinking about wills, estate planning, and what they're going to do with it, can you give us a bit of insight into the way most people actually think about wills? Like, what do most people do from your experience, and how do they approach wills?
There's sort of two camps, if I can describe it that way. There's the camp where people think that by signing the will, they're sealing their fate. So they have just a resistance to the process because they feel like it's going to end badly for them. And sometimes I've said, I'm not the hand of God. Even if you sign this will, it's not your death sentence. So some people are just naturally resistant to the fear of their own mortality. They don't want to confront the issues around, who's going to look after my children if I'm not here, or who's going to look after my pet. Sometimes it's really just as basic as that, where it's just a really emotional, taxing time for them to just go through the scenarios that we go through as part of the process. If you're not here, who's going to care for your children, or who's going to take control of your assets in order to provide for your spouse or other sort of family members that you might be helping at the time. And then you've got the very proactive clients, and it's so helpful having you engage with clients to have that initial discussion, because those sort of clients come and they're well educated about the process. They've come to me already having discussions with each other about things, what's going to happen if I pass away and you're still alive? Are you going to remarry? The children are going to be young. Our family living interstate. Do the kids have to move? They're really well versed, at least in having the thought process about it. So it's not, no one likes to see me, I'll be honest, because I'm either talking to them about their own death or someone has passed away. So no one really likes talking to me sometimes. But by the same token, a lot of clients, once they've gone through the process, feel comforted that they've done it, because there's an element that they feel like they've got their house in order. So, if something, that proverbial bust happens, they know that things are in order and children will be looked after. The right people are making decisions around, distribution of assets or sale of assets, investments. And so, once they've gone through the process, it's often less confronting, and sometimes clients go into the other camp where they're so far particular about what they want to do that it's almost me pulling them back, saying, okay, but now we have to do practical level things. I appreciate you want to specifically name 100 different people, and that's honest to God. I had one client want to list about 100 different names in his will. Yeah. So
it's amazing, right? I guess, you got that's a very difficult thing to think about generally. And I guess some people just avoid it completely. Other people approach it so clinically that they don't have to think about that. So, there are two different ways to avoid the topic, really. And I think, certainly in our discussions with clients, when we're raising it with them, because either they've done it or they did a long time ago, or what they've got in place isn't appropriate anymore and they haven't really thought about it. We, absolutely find that they need to take care of this estate planning stuff Not really for themselves, because, when you're dead, you're dead. You're not there anymore. It doesn't really matter what
Suspended.
happens to your stuff, right? So it's really about the people that they love and care about, and making sure that either they're taken care of, or even as simple as just it not ending up in a big fight between the people that they care about who are left behind. And that, if anything, that is the reason to do it properly, separate to all the financial stuff. So, it's so important to just get done. So,
And,
yeah,
and, I, and I think too, because the nature of our assets are changing in terms of we typically have more structures, or, we don't have the vanilla mum and dad and the kids, and the properties are held jointly and they pass, smoothly and equally. We're more often now a blended family context with competing needs between spouses and children and, minor children. And so sometimes it's just difficult for people to think about just who do I have to provide for, and how am I going to do that? How am I going to get there? And so the process is sometimes, difficult to confront initially, but more often than not, people are really happy they've done it, because, like you say, they feel like, they've got the right things in place now moving forward to avoid the fights, to avoid the disputes.
and you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, because, most people think, oh, I need to get wills done. But wills, and, we'll try not to get too technical, but wills only handle anything that you've got in your personal name, but they don't cover, joint assets, company assets, anything in trusts, superannuation. Am I missing anything? I'm sure there's more to it.
It's so true, and sometimes people do have a perception of how wealthy they are, and when you break it down, it's actually held in a lot of structures that aren't in their name. And so working through, well, outside of your will, you might have your family trust, and that might have substantial wealth in it. It might have properties in it that need to be managed. Who's going to control that entity? Who's going to do the tax returns, make the decisions around distributions of income? And when you have the mum and the dad, more often than not, passing away, then you've got that, the level of fight that you tend to see these days, because some families are great at talking, and they're great at setting expectations between people, and they're great at being collaborative. Other families aren't, and so that estate planning process will draw out the need for parents to talk to children, or have a family meeting, or just put people on the same page, and it's preempting the dispute, which is often the key talking point. And it's far better to have that on the table sooner than later, because people do have perceived expectations, and shifting those expectations when someone's passed away and they're grieving, it's a hard dynamic to deal with.
Yeah, 100%. And I think when you just said that, preempting potential conflict and issues that are coming up, it's not like in families that are not getting along, or it's easy to identify that. But how often do we see families that get along really well, but as soon as there's money involved, and as soon as there's discussions about who's getting what, the families that get along so well can just, turn to crap, really, because those relationships break down, they stop communicating well. And so part of that preempting issues is also preempting issues that you don't think will happen, or preempting issues that you don't expect to happen, and making sure that any planning you're doing is pretty watertight, right?
Absolutely. And it's identifying, sometimes your own failures, perhaps as a parent, where you might have given loans to children and, given more to one than not to the other. And for me, that's a red flag. For that parent, they might think, no, it's absolutely fine. But when that parent's not there to mediate the children, or to moderate their, expectations, that's when you see the disputes. And it's difficult, because you don't want families to fall apart over these things when they probably do need each other the most, after death, and getting through that whole grieving process. And so it's and I think that's why it's confronting for some people, to be honest, too, because they don't want to perhaps think about what they've done and what they've created or what they've enabled, and so it's it can be difficult for some people.
Yeah, it is hard. I guess the easy thing to do is ignore it, put your head in the sand. If you genuinely care about the people you're leaving behind and you don't want them to be in a worse situation, not financially, but just personally, then it makes it even more important to, make it as simple and clear, to prevent as much of that disagreement as possible, I guess. So,
I think your point on keeping it simple is important, but I think the other thing that a lot of clients don't realise is just how much freedom they have in their estate planning to create trusts for beneficiaries and structure the trusts or that beneficiary's entitlement in a manner which will give them good asset protection or good tax minimisation. And when you walk clients through, like you do with your clients, the process of maybe a testamentary trust is good, you're a high-risk occupation or you've got young children, you can benefit from the tax, minimisations that come with those trusts. It's almost sometimes enlightening for clients because they don't think that these options are there, and then when you take them through it, they get some comfort that, sometimes it's the exact opposite. It's protecting it from a family law dispute where they have their daughter-in-law that they think is a gold digger, and so they want to protect the grandchildren and their son, and that's the discussions that we have, which and you do the same, where clients, it's a personal discussion. They're revealing a lot of intimate stuff, about their lives and their children's lives, and so when they have that confidentiality, private discussion, I'm not going to repeat it, you're not going to repeat it, but here's some options, they get a great deal of pleasure in the fact that they are not ruling from the grave. Some people, there's a difference, but, giving a platform and a structure that will actually benefit their children, protect their hard-earned worth, because, wealth, they've worked hard and they've earned it, and they want to make sure it's, maximised. And so there's a lot of options as part of that estate planning process that probably clients don't know of, and that's fair enough. They're not a lawyer, and that's why we're here to help them through.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's we'll probably need to have a different episode to talk about some of the technical aspects of it, but there's a lot of stuff that needs to be considered and put in place to make an estate plan as effective as possible and as beneficial as possible. And we can talk about how to structure superannuation the right way. I mean, by restructuring superannuation for our clients. Every year we look at that and making some changes, we're able to save them hundreds of thousands of dollars of tax that they would pay. It's basically an estate tax that we work around. Other things like testamentary trust, like you spoke about, it's really about protecting children. I think and so that's where absolutely what can be seen as complexity. Some complexity is really, really beneficial. It's really important, in fact, to have some of that complexity. When I mentioned keeping things simple before, I was thinking from the perspective of keep it as simple as possible for your beneficiaries by making it really clear and take away uncertainty. And if complex structures are going to be needed, then make them as clear as possible. So even if the actual estate plan is complex, it's very simple for the beneficiaries so that there's less arguments, less decisions, less choices that need to be made. And therefore, it all just works how it's meant to work, I guess. So I guess if we're trying not to get focused on the technical detail, because we could get into the legal and tax jargon and speak for a couple of hours on that, Jen. But I think what we really want to do is make sure people understand how they should think about estate planning. So how should people think about estate planning? It's not actually about wills and powers of attorney and trusts and that sort of thing. You mentioned some of the people that you've spoken to about the outcomes that they want and the risks they want to mitigate. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, and I think it's the whole point of your podcast. It's kind of like, well, what's your purpose? What do you want to do with your when you're not here? What do you want to achieve? And for some people, it is, being philanthropic and leaving a legacy and starting a charitable trust and, having that ongoing, legacy. For other people, it's about making sure that, grandchildren are educated. Do you know what I mean? It's making sure that their priority might be continuing what they're doing at the moment and making sure that those children get the education that they think. For others, it's about protecting the wealth from the predators or the creditors, or protecting the beneficiary from themselves. If they're someone who's vulnerable or, suffers from addiction issues or things like that, then, it's about making sure that for the rest of their life that they're protected and they're safe and that they're in an environment where they can have access to medical care, or they can have access to a roof over their head that's, safe, and, that people can't sue, or that if they partner with someone that they can't be taken in a family law proceeding. So it's starting from the end and then coming back. Do you know what I mean? So it's saying, okay, well, who's in your life that you want to provide for? What do you do today? Like me, I in my wills, if there's no spouse or children, then I want to be philanthropic. So, part of my purpose is leaving the world a better place. And the way you can do that through an estate planning process is to donate. And some people donate during their lives, so they want to continue that. So it's sometimes starting with the end and then coming back through the dynamics and then coming back through the structures that are optional, or open to them to choose, and then, seeing where they land.
Because I guess people generally, either we identify that people haven't got what they need in place, let alone do they have a will, and then most people think, okay, I need a will, I've got to tick that box, so I'll go and get a will. But
stop there, though. It doesn't stop there.
It doesn't stop there, but it's not even about I need a will. It's actually the wrong question that some people are asking themselves. It can also then go to, what are the outcomes I want, which is part of the story. But I think even more powerful, and I think when we work together on clients and we take a different approach, it has the biggest impact. And that's when we take it from, getting the will done, no, just focusing on the outcomes. Yeah, that's good, but it can even be better. And ideally, if we're really talking to clients about what is important to them, what is important for them in their lives while they're alive, but for their families and for the things that the people, the things, the causes they're passionate about. And that can really help design the right estate plan that's going to help them achieve the outcomes that is actually best for them. And, that certainly ends up producing much better estate plans than just, Jennifer, I need a will done. Can you write one up for me?
100%. And I think that sort of comes back to what I sort of started initially with, which is giving clients permission to do things that they want to do in their estate plans, because there is this sort of stereotypical attitude that, well, I've got a wife and 2 kids, it all goes to them. I mean, yes, a large degree of it has to for a number of reasons. But there's also that ability that, if that person, for example, wants to benefit, if they had an experience growing up where they were homeless or where they went through school and they were funded by a particular charity for their education, when you start having conversations like that with clients and they say, I'd really love to benefit or have a scholarship for a student. And, that, and I say, well, you can do that. It's okay. We can do that in your will. It's so rewarding for that person to be able to achieve what really, that it's not taking away from, other beneficiaries under their wills, but it's also just, sinking in that little bit of them, which, they want to continue, or it's honouring. Sometimes with clients, they've had an experience where, someone's, been in a car accident or suffered from, an illness, and they want to make provision for that particular, hospital or charity, or even if it's a friend. I've got a client recently who, she pays for her friends, football membership and, the odd, larger capital sum, and she wants that to continue. And they're just friends. There's no moral obligation that the court says we have to provide for your friends. So it's a completely generous thing for her to do. But it was crucial for her and her estate planning that friend still had those things paid for her as part of the rest of her life. And so, she was really happy when we did, again, a sort of a trust for her, but, that gave her a lovely sense of comfort that what she was presently doing in her life out of the kindness of her heart would still continue. And, and it's okay to do that. Yeah. So sometimes, working through, what, if you're not here, what would you want to happen? It's a very simple question, but it's really needs digging, if that makes sense. And then you will end up with a successful estate plan that, even though the whole process is sometimes a bit daunting and confronting, and it's your own mortality and things like that, but you've got that peace of mind, and sometimes it's just what you need.
100%. I mean, once it's done and it's done well and done properly, it's not as, the monster's not really under the bed, and it's not as scary as what you thought it might be. So, but the empowerment that you can get from going through the process, and that peace of mind that you've now got that you didn't realize you needed, is so valuable, right?
It is. And look, some people use wills as a weapon, I'll be honest. There's a lot of war stories where people, there was a family court case probably a couple of years ago now where, it was a large estate, and in the will it said, my daughter will receive a benefit, and I think from memory it was about 16 mil. So you can imagine the size of the estate if that's just one of the gifts. But, she would only get her gift under the will if she had divorced her husband at the time Mum died. So, it's, people can be a little bit cruel sometimes, and sometimes it's deliberate, sometimes it's not. But, at the end of the day, it's also my job to say, that's probably not okay to say, or let's keep it out of the will, because a will does become a public document at the end of the day if it's probated. So, you don't need your dirty laundry aired, and you don't need to disclose too much in that will either. So, where people do have other structures like trusts or super funds or companies, sometimes they don't want that referred to in a will because it might disclose too much of an estate, do you know what I mean, that other people don't know. So people can still retain their privacy, if they want to. So it's they can be a shield and a sword sometimes.
yeah, definitely. So what about risk management? I mean, I know in our line of work, we're always thinking about risk management, and you guys do to a large extent as well. So what are the things that people have to worry about, and what can go wrong? I guess there's different ways of thinking about it. What can go wrong when things aren't done properly, and what can go wrong when things are done in a particular way? The very obvious one is that people that kind of go, well, I've got my will done, and if I die, everything goes to my wife, and then, otherwise it all goes to the kids. It's pretty simple. That's all taken care of. And, quite often we'll identify that, no, it's not quite as simple as that. And, there's actually risks in there. Who can contest a will? What are some of the things that people need to be aware of that they might not know about?
Yeah, well, I think it's just looking, contesting the will is the obvious one, because that's often a concern for people, because, people have a fear, that, their brother might contest or someone might contest. And so taking them through the process of, well, the law says who can contest, and then asking them the questions about why they think they can contest, it might give them some comfort, or like you say, it might identify a risk, where I say to clients, well, this is a risk. And if that's a risk, then what we do is look at other structures that the client has and see how we can utilise those structures to benefit who the client really wants to. And things like family trusts are available to do that. Superannuation and life insurance is available to do that. So it's looking at their entire sort of pool, so to speak, to see how we can put a puzzle together that might mitigate or minimise that risk. And things such as control and doing nominations for super and, keeping funds out of the estate perhaps are ways of mitigating that risk if the risk is real. And sometimes it is. Sometimes it absolutely is. Then we can definitely look at those sort of asset structuring parts and, get advice from you around, is this workable? Should we establish a separate trust and park some money over there? Do you know what I mean? And not have that risk of the claim, excluding that beneficiary or particular risk claimant from that trust. There's different ways we can manage people's estate planning process through restructuring, which will achieve that minimising of the risk issues that we identify as part of the process. And some people aren't alert to the risk issues. So, some people don't realise, having the son or the daughter living at home for, a long time of their life or paying for their mortgage repayments or, putting, roofs over their head and paying for rent, whatever it might be. I mean, that can create that dependency. And there's no rule at law that says children, for example, have to be provided equally. So, I've got 2 kids. I don't have to leave a 50-50 split. But taking clients through the process of, okay, well, what are the children's needs? What provision have you made for them? If there's one child who, is getting that financial advantage during life, then you can sure bet they're going to want that financial advantage afterwards. And so, that's a risk, because potentially that child might say, well, I deserve more than 50 because I've always had more than 50. Why would you cut me off now? And then, you have...
And that's the way the law looks at it, right? That if you've been dependent and if you've needed 70% of the money or the help from your parents, then the courts would say, well, if you needed 70, then you should keep getting 70. Is that kind of the way
it sort of is, yeah. That the more financially dependent you are, the probably in the end, the more financial provision you will get. And so,
whereas some people think, oh, I've given them what they need.
Exactly.
They don't need much anymore, but it doesn't work that way.
She's had enough. I've done this their whole life. And that's where, the dispute happens after death, because, that person says, well, I still should get more. And the other sibling says, hang on, you have had so much. Like, can you dial this down now? The gravy train is over. And so I can spot that. Whereas the parents, for example, might think it's just normal. It's the way we've always treated this child. It's the way, everyone knows what we're doing and that sort of thing. And it's hard for some clients to get their head around the risk. And it's the same thing with taking clients through the process of particularly aging parents, and part of the estate planning process. And one of the things to think about is as parents, for me, my mum's older, and it's like, okay, well, if you, touch wood, start to lose your marbles, who's going to manage your money? Who's going to pay your bills? Who's going to be in charge if we need to move you out of home and put you in an accommodation facility? Who's going to make those decisions? And so sometimes the estate planning...
It's not just about a will now. We're talking about documents which provide certainty or more certainty or guidance while you're still alive.
Yeah. And so what happens is, as we have this aging population, we have people living longer, and we have, children who might have expected to retire sooner, based on an inheritance coming through, aren't retiring. And so this inheritance impatience, it even comes on earlier. I've had many instances where, poor mum or dad are being used in a pawn to pay off children's mortgages, or properties are being sold and children are taking the money. And, powers of attorney documents are quite an important discussion throughout this process, because they are a document that will operate while you're alive and you might not have capacity. And choosing the right child to manage your affairs, or the right person, doesn't have to be a child, but the right person to manage your affairs and protect your interests while you're still here is often important. And it's often important to stop that potential conflict happening, because the conflict can happen while you're alive, and the disputes are between the attorneys about, whether mum should continue paying the grandchildren's education, for example. So, I had that recently where there was 3 children and there's an age gap between the children. And so the youngest child was still having his children, so the grandchildren's school fees paid. And the older one, who was the attorney, said, "Oh, mum's lost capacity now. I'm in control. That can stop." And he said, "Well, why? You two have had it paid. Why am I being punished?" And so when we talk through that estate planning process with clients, particularly older clients, it's a much more detailed discussion around powers of attorney, because we are living longer, and touch wood, we're living longer with some form of cognitive impairment. And so what we do is go through, okay, well, like you say, what are you doing now that you want to continue doing? And prompting them through, oh, you do pay school fees. Okay, well, let's make sure that that's recorded in your power of attorney, so that we don't have a potential conflict transaction happening. Or, if you're making donations regularly and you still want to continue them, let's word that in. Or if you want to stay in your home for as long as you can and have your cost of care paid for from your own resources, let's hardwire that in. So depending on the age bracket of clients and depending on, their goals and their wishes, it will be a different document. But certainly, there's points in time, I think, in our lives where whether we're, like you and I'm going to call us both young, whether we're young and with, young kids, touch wood, something happened to Clint, I'd want, a structure where I can maximise, income tax-free to pay the school fees. Do you know what I mean? So it's a different estate plan for our point in time, as opposed to, my mum, for example, who still wants to benefit grandchildren, still wants to benefit her children, doesn't want to annoy anyone, has 5 daughters, 1 son, not enough rings on her fingers to divvy up. So, it's a different discussion around, what she, and her pressing concern is not when she's passed away. Her pressing concern is now while she's alive. And so it's depending, like I said, on your age bracket and your needs in life, what you want to achieve in life. It'll be a very different outcome, and that's the fun of what I do, is that I get to learn things about people and then try and honour them in a legal way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think again, it's just about without getting into technicalities and solutions in this chat, but listeners really being aware of what can go wrong and why they need to at least think about this stuff. Whether it's, with powers of attorney, for example, while you're still alive, you might want to appoint different people. There might be one person that you trust who's got the nous and sensible enough to manage money and make decisions like that. But you might have a completely different person or child that, helps with medical treatment, or where you're going to live, and whether you should go in the nice nursing home or the really dodgy one, because it's cheaper.
They won't worry about spending their own inheritance. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and it sounds funny, but it's so true. You want to appoint people that share the same values.
Absolutely.
Because they're going to step into your shoes. So
absolutely
important. We also think about, you mentioned. Yeah, I'll agree with you that we're young. I'll take that. Not so sure, but we'll take it.
I'm running.
Run with it, I reckon. But when you got children who are young or not adults, there are some definite things to consider as well. And it's not just, are they legal adults at the age of 18? I know that when we're having these discussions with our clients, we're definitely finding that people are saying, I would not want my 18-year-old receiving $1 million or $5 million or whatever it is if we died and, they received the money at 18, that would not be a good thing. And, we've spoken about different strategies that clients can put in place, whether they have some sort of restrictions until they've matured, and things like that. So, what are some of the examples there that you've done there?
By 18, they've finished school, and most kids these days are doing gap years, so they're not going to uni until the year later, and uni degrees are longer, and statistically most kids are still home at 32. So when you're looking, like you say, at that age of maturity and things like that, it's a lot further out than most people realise these days in terms of just the life cycle of when a child leaves home. And if you're looking at children not moving out of home until 32, I mean, that's a long time for you and I, at least with our young children. So we're not going to retire anytime soon either. But the strategies around that and it's very individual. And some clients have children that are really well, established and stable and educated in finances, usually because they've had that, good training from mum or dad. But it's you can either sort of stagger distributions to children, or you can put co-controllers in with children to try and moderate decision making and give them that education around, okay, well, I'm now 21 and I have access to $1 million. I'm going to buy a Maserati and travel, as opposed to, perhaps being moderated or educated by someone to say, well, actually, maybe invest it and maybe continue with your education, get your degree. This 1 million could be, 1.5 in another 20 years, or whatever it might be, giving them that supported decision making. And it's a very obviously client by client, case by case way of doing it. But invariably, most people these days, do a testamentary trust, and what changes within that testamentary trust is who controls it, at what age children can, step up as a co-controller or as a sole controller, and who can benefit. And I certainly see a lot of people more recently, and I would say in the last 5 years, who are just doing bloodline trusts. And I think that bloodline trust, which is just, children, grandchildren, and, lineal descendants, has come about because, really as a society, we are statistically divorcing or separating or living in blended families. And so it's not just divorce anymore, which was probably, the negative word of the sort of 70s and 80s. It's now blended families, and you're looking at, multiple blended families almost. So, I had one guy who at 66 was on his third spouse. She was pregnant. She was a lot younger, and he already had 5 children with 2 other women. And that was a hard estate plan to deal with, because so many competing issues, adult children, a young child on the way, ex-spouses, him going into retirement, probably not enough money to go around. And so, moderating those competing needs between the beneficiaries is difficult. And it's
that's complex, huh? Yeah, and I guess,
it is. And as a society, we are becoming complex.
Yeah, and we hear those stories of people where they've, I've come across it where it'll be a child whose parent has parents have separated, and then one of them has remarried after separation, and then the wealth ends up going down a path that excludes, one side of the family completely, probably unintentionally, in fact. Yeah. But we've seen those, you see the headlines in the news, but we see it with clients, just regular people as well, where people that people want to inherit sometimes just don't, because they haven't understood the risks and the issues that can come up with those sorts of things, I guess.
It's that, and it's also the flip of that, where you have that blended family and you've got stepchildren challenging an estate against biological children. Do you know what I mean? So it's also the risk of saying, well, you are a blended family, and yes, you have your own adult children, but you've also had children that have lived in that house and grown up with you, and you've made financial provision for, and sometimes that parent will say, well, the way we've structured our assets is that we've kept that separation of assets. Hers are hers and mine are mine. And, we've agreed that it goes this way. And, it doesn't, that level of agreement is great, but it doesn't, stop people challenging that will, and it doesn't stop contests. And so, putting in place safeguards around using their own existing structures like super to, make sure that payment's made direct and doesn't get put into the estate and is open to challenge is important. And I think people, not understanding just what might be that risk in terms of, even with the definition of child, like you say. I mean, these days, I've done quite a few plans in the last 2 years, or estate planning plans, with clients who are, the same sex couple and had children through, artificial insemination, or they've had, children from overseas, through the surrogacy laws over there. And so, they're not recognised as adopted children here because our laws don't marry up with the American laws, for example. And so from an estate planning perspective, for me, you want to avoid that unintended consequence of making sure that, that child is either named, or there's, because particularly, with the same-sex male couple, obviously there's another woman involved who's had the child, and making sure that, there's no sort of parental claim, making sure that, the child is a child of the couple, not just perhaps one of the fathers who might have been the donor, and then taking that step even further. And in this particular case that I was working on, we went through all the trust deeds to make sure that the definition of children made sure that these children benefited, because they were a couple who each of the partners had fathered the children, so siblings, same mother but different fathers, if that makes sense. So a very unique but wonderful situation. And but it was that crossover with the international law, the adoption law here, the definition of insemination, artificial means, and even making sure that we changed the trust deeds just to be safe that these children were recognised as beneficiaries under the trust. So, sometimes there is the devil in the detail that people might not recognise. And, they were such a lovely couple to deal with, and, complicated, but such a lovely way of being complicated too. So
super complicated, and yes, you can just see how important it is to understand, as you said, definitions of words.
Just a word. I know you and I
sounds so simple, and but if you don't define what a child is, then how do you know what a child is? If it's not a standard definition. So I think, again, we just have to be aware that our circumstances may require some investigation, at least understand what we're dealing with.
Yes.
Again, it's in order to make sure that the outcomes that we want occur, which is always about helping those we leave behind, right? So, again, we just got to think about it a bit more, I think. So, no, that's a great example. So, Jennifer, before we finish up, this is I know, just conscious of time, and, we certainly need to have additional episodes on some of the complexities, but, this podcast is really focused on purpose, and we know that the purpose of understanding our purpose really helps us make better estate plans. It's not just about writing a will and those sorts of things, which is why when we approach it from that perspective, we can, as we said before, have such a much more comprehensive and powerful estate plan and make sure what we want to happen actually happens, manage the risks and all that sort of thing. So we also know that, how people think about their purpose can change over time.
Yes.
The things that are important to them today may be different at different times in their lives. And everybody is a bit different, and everyone has different definitions of purpose as well. And so we see that every day with clients. But I'm interested to know, from your perspective, have you figured out what your purpose is yet? Or how would you define your purpose right now?
I'm listening to your podcasts to help, but I think on a very, very, basic level for me, my purpose would be to, create some children that, you know, are good humans and who, you know, will make the world a better place. And for me personally, it is trying to make the world a better place. And I'm not the person who needs the legacy in the hallway of the hospital, do you know what I mean, to say we've donated X amount of money. But I think, you know, doing what I do, you can help people on just a very small level. But I think more broadly, you know, leaving the world a better place is probably a big part of my purpose.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. And, you know, what you do is helps people tremendously. I mean, giving them peace of mind and getting them out of, you know, situations and avoiding situations that they could have found themselves in if they hadn't got that plan done, the estate planning done correctly. So, no, unbelievably valuable. So thanks so much, Jennifer. That's been really great. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and some of your experience and stories. Hopefully, well, not hopefully, I'm sure our listeners have got a lot of value out of our chat, and they'll be able to start thinking about not just their wills, not just their powers of attorney, but, you know, how do they want to manage what happens to their wealth and what happens when they die. So, you know, if you haven't had a look at it, you really need to pull out your will. If you haven't got one, make sure you get one done, and really think about what do you want to happen when you're not here anymore. So thanks again, Jennifer, for coming on, and look forward to chatting again soon.
Sounds great. Thank you, Thabojan.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to this episode. Our aim is to share the knowledge with as many people as possible, so please share it with everyone you know. And if you're enjoying the show, please subscribe and visit our website, richwithpurpose.com.au, to get access to all our free resources. See you next time.